Hello everyone! In today's video, we will talk about quantitative research designs. There are two primary types of quantitative research. The first one is descriptive. Descriptive talks about what is going on. And the second is explanatory, which asks, why is it going on? As such, there are research designs that are descriptive and explanatory. Researchers have posed numerous quantitative research designs, both descriptive and explanatory, and they are too numerous to cover. However, we will focus our attention primarily on the major designs proposed by Campbell and Stanley, 1963. The first one is descriptive design. The main purpose of descriptive studies is to describe and understand what is in a specific situation with an identified population. For example, an educational researcher may want to know what is the attitude of school counselors about the use of conflict resolution for peace education, or what responsibilities do counselors have in peace education? Descriptive research design, the researcher does not attempt to manipulate or exert control over the phenomenon being studied. Rather, he or she observes and measures it as it occurs. Furthermore, the researcher does not seek to examine a causal relationship between variables. Thus, there are no independent or dependent variables in a descriptive study. Descriptive studies are often used to gain knowledge, to identify a problem for further or more sophisticated research. Next, correlation design. Primarily, this research design aims to examine the extent in which two or more variables relate to one another. For example, a researcher may desire to know if a relationship exists between the study habits of students and their college success. The researcher who wishes to conduct correlational research is simply interested to examine if a relationship between or among variables exists. Researchers often choose to conduct correlational research as exploratory or beginning research to determine if more rigorous research is necessary. In correlational design, the researcher needs to ensure that a theoretical or conceptual framework for each variable under study is presented. The results of a correlational study demonstrate whether or not the variables relate. The next design is predictive design. The chief goal of predictive research design is to predict if a certain variable has a direct cause and effect to another variable, even in the absence of manipulation or experimentation. For instance, if a researcher wishes to know if study habits of students has a direct cause and effect on their college entrance exam performance, he or she should use predictive research design. The variables in a prediction study are referred to as the predictor and criterion, and the researcher is concerned with whether one or more variables can predict another variable, according to Zapkio 2012. For example, my study entitled Binary Logistic Regression Model in Predicting the Employability of Senior High School Graduates. I made use of binary logistic regression for me to predict the employability of senior high school graduates. I have made or formulated a model in the prediction phase. Next in line is comparative designs. Comparison is a fundamental tool for analysis as it sharpens the power of description and plays a central role in concept formation suggestive of similarities and differences among cases, groups, and individuals. Comparative research design is primarily conducted to determine the difference between the variables and between individuals or groups under investigation. Generally, there are three types, and these include experimental study, quasi-experimental study, and non-experimental study or observational study. Experimental study mainly aims to determine if a cause and effect relationship exists between variables through conducting experimentation. Thus, while predictive design also concerns about cause and effect, experimental researchers actually perform experimentation or manipulation of some variables to determine their effects. In an experimental study, a researcher manipulates a variable of interest, whereas in an observational study, a researcher observes the variable of interest and its associations. Experimental study is characterized by two things. One is manipulation. The researcher manipulates the independent variable or implements the intervention and observes the effect on the dependent variable. The second is control. A control or comparison group is any group that does not serve as the treatment group or does not receive the experimental treatment. Their performance on the dependent variable serves as a basis of comparison for the experimental group's performance on the dependent variable. Their purpose is to control for threats to validity. A control group is important as scientific evidence requires at least one comparison. There are different types of control groups according to Kasdin 2003, and these are no treatment control groups, waiting list control groups, no contact control groups, non-specific treatment control groups, routine or standard treatment control groups, yoked control groups, and non-equivalent control groups. The type of group you choose to use in your research study, if you are doing a group comparison design, depends upon three factors as outlined by Kasdin 2003. These are the following: the intent of the research study, previous research, and ethical and practical considerations. But according to Cromwell Aral, there are four elements of true experimental research design. One is manipulation, second is control, we have the random assignment, and lastly, random selection. The next one is quasi-experimental study. This study primarily intends to determine the causality of an intervention or treatment with the target population. Quasi-experimental designs allow the researcher to manipulate and control the experiment, but they do not include the random assignment of participants. When it is not feasible to conduct a true experimental study, researchers may often choose to use quasi-experimental design in their study. A researcher conducting a quasi-experimental design may ask, what effect does participation in values education developed using problem or situation analysis have on junior high school students when compared to participation in values education using pure lecture method? Since a quasi-experimental study uses groups that have been previously formed, a researcher needs to guarantee that the groups are relatively similar to one another in terms of students' gender, ethnicity, classification for special educational services, among others. Extraneous variables are identified and controlled, and that results about causal relationships are discussed with caution and with ethical considerations. Unlike experimental study, wherein researchers have to manipulate and control the predictor variable, non-experimental study does not involve manipulation of the predictor variable. Thus, researcher may just rely on observation and other means of interpretation to come to a conclusion. Typically, this means that non-experimental researcher must rely on correlations, surveys, or case studies and cannot demonstrate a true cause and effect relationship. So, obviously, the difference between the two is in their methodology. Experimental researchers are capable of performing experiments on people and manipulating the predictor variables. Non-experimental researchers are forced to observe and interpret what they are looking at. For example, let's say you are asked to conduct a study about how violent men and women are. Obviously, you cannot have a true experimental study because the predictor variable for violence is gender, and you cannot manipulate gender. Thus, your study design must be non-experimental, and it should be observational. Another example, if you are asked to study about the effect of war trauma to children's self-esteem, you cannot just get a child, and subject them to different wars and then measure the effects of the war trauma in their self-esteem, because it is not ethical and moral to do that. Research can be non-experimental because it focuses on a single variable rather than a statistical relationship between two variables. Say, for example, if as a researcher you are interested in the relationship between children's being the victim of physical or sexual and the children's self-esteem, the first thing you do is to select your respondents using variety of sampling technique to be able to come up with those who are victims of physical or sexual abuse and then give tests to measure their self-esteem. This study would tell you something about self-esteem of children who have been physically or sexually abused, but it would not tell you how the self-esteem of children who have been sexually or physically abused differs from the self-esteem of children who have not. Second, research can also be non-experimental because it focuses on a statistical relationship between two variables, but it does not include the manipulation of a predictor or an independent variable, and also random assignment of participants to conditions or orders of conditions or both. For example, if a researcher who would try to find out the significant relationship between students' bullying to students' academic performance, the researcher might just use correlation design and he does not have to conduct an experiment. In quasi-experimental research, the researcher manipulates the independent variable but does not randomly assign participants to conditions or order of conditions. For example, a researcher might start an anti-bullying program in a school and compare the incidence of bullying at that school with that incidence at a similar school that has no anti-bullying program. Finally, research can be non-experimental if it is qualitative. In qualitative research, the data are usually non-numerical and are analyzed using non-statistical techniques. But we will not be discussing qualitative research in this video, so watch out for that. In summary, I would like to present to you the diagram of the different quantitative research designs that I've discussed today. For more information about these topics, it is important to read primary text sources on these designs. So, here are they. Now, if you have comments, suggestions, questions, concerns, please comment down below. If you like this video and you find this helpful, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you so much. Until the next video. Bye!